All right. Hello again, brothers and sisters. This is Rio Youngs coming to you again with another adult Bible study. We're coming out of the book of Daniel, and this is uh, our third lesson in chapter 3, May 3rd, 2026. The title of today's lesson is Another in the Fire. Daniel chapter 3. Our central truth for today is Christians can stand firm in their faith despite temptation or opposition. Our key verse is going to come out of Daniel 3:17. New Living Translation says, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty." All right, so by this point in our study of Daniel, you have probably noticed the theme of taking a stand for the one true God. Here again in chapter 3, we'll see how the Jews were continuing to figure out what it looked like to be God's people in a place filled with pagan worship. Now, again, I've said this probably in the first chapter. I'm not sure, somewhere along I've already said this, is that Daniel and his friends, this is focused on Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. And from reading this, we know that there were many, many more Jews that were taken into captivity. And if there were any others in this experience with him, they're never mentioned, but we do know that there were plenty of Jews out doing other types of slave work around the Babylonian Empire at this time. In Daniel chapter 1, God showed favor to Daniel and his friends, causing them to thrive under pressure. In chapter 2, God empowered Daniel to save himself, his friends, and many others. Now in chapter 3, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, they are being put to the test, and they are facing a life or death dilemma. Daniel had told Nebuchadnezzar that he was the statue's golden head in his dream. What did the king do next? He set up a golden statue and called his subjects to worship it. The author of Daniel probably intended for readers to be amused and appalled at the same time from the king's actions. Note how the Jewish captives were presented as wise, thoughtful, faithful, and strong, while the Babylonian king comes across as bombastic, ignorant, and impetuous. All right, let's turn to Daniel chapter 3. We're going to go ahead like I usually do. I'm going to write 1 through 30. And then you can follow along as we go. Daniel 1 through 30. And I am in my New International Version today. Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other providential officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other providential officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and the peoples of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, all kinds of music, they must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your Majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. We don't need a second chance. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your Majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Were there not 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" "Yes, your Majesty, there sure was." And he said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out here now." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and they were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any other god except their own. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. All right, Babylon. It's kind of mind-boggling and one of those God things. You think here, Babylon, Iraq, right? Iraq, Babylon, this Gentile nation, this which is a Muslim nation, Babylon, and this God, this king, declares this to his nation. And we look at where Iraq and Iran and the Middle East are today. Back in that time, it ended up becoming the Medes, Nebuchadnezzar and his thing, and then it becomes the Medes and Persians, and it just becomes this big, huge. They saw the works of Yahweh, the 70 years that the children of Israel were in captivity. Each of these different kings throughout those 70 years, one time or another, witnessed the power of God, Yahweh. And here, Nebuchadnezzar sees it, and even though we know that he continued to worship any and every other god that there was, but at this moment, he recognized that this God, the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, this God was the Most High God. Verses 1 through 7. The Scottish theologian P.T. Forsyth said, "Unless there is within us that which is above us, we shall soon yield to that which is around us." In other words, if we are not filled with God's Spirit and committed to serving Him alone, we will soon blend into the culture that surrounds us. As we'll continue to see in Daniel chapter 3, the Jewish captives in Babylon were under intense pressure to conform to the culture around them. Would they go along with the crowd just so they could survive another day? Or would they stay faithful to God no matter the cost? Because of the proportions listed in Daniel 3, it's likely that King Nebuchadnezzar's statue was obelisk shape, kind of like the Washington Monument, rather than human shaped. When the statue was completed, this king summoned leaders from all around Babylon to attend the dedication ceremony. Verse 4 specifies that there were people of multiple ethnicities present, likely indicating that Nebuchadnezzar had appointed native rulers to govern the provinces he had conquered. Again, we talked about this in the chapter 1. Nebuchadnezzar came in and he was like Rome. He came in and he conquered the huge area, and wherever he conquered, he took people like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. He captured, he brought slaves back. Some he worked as slaves, some he brought in to be educated, and also it would have educated his people also on the culture and the languages and the habits and whatever of the other nations that he was conquering. So yes, in this likelihood, like this Bible says, he called all these people from around his dominion and said, "Hey, be here on April Fool's Day, April 1st. Be here April 1st. We're going to do this dedication." So all these people gathered up for this dedication. It was not until the officials arrived at the ceremony that they received the ultimatum to bow down at the statue or die. The king would not implement a standard method of execution. Instead, disobedient subjects would be thrown into a blazing furnace. This threat suggests the huge kiln that had been used for smelting metal for the statue that was still burning nearby. This huge statue that they had to make, somehow they had a supersized furnace to be able to make that big of a structure, the blocks, whatever they were making. Okay, the burning of criminals is referred to occasionally throughout Babylon, Persian, and Greek periods. And there is evidence in Jeremiah 29, verse 22, that this was not the only time Nebuchadnezzar used this form of execution. The crowd took the king's ultimatum seriously and bowed to the ground and worshiped the gold statue. Verses 8 through 15. At this point, we can feel the tension building in the story. Although it seemed everyone was bowing to Nebuchadnezzar's idol, there were a few Jewish men in Babylon who wouldn't be so quick to follow the king's command. Interestingly, the text says that the king's astrologers were the ones who informed him that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused to worship the statue. The astrologers were not listed in verse 3 among the officials who were required to bow down to the statue. Instead, they were part of the group that had been upstaged by Daniel in chapter 2. When they had been called to decipher the dream, the astrologers, along with the Chaldeans and soothsayers and whatever, none of them could do it. So they were upstaged by Daniel in chapter 2. They were holding a grudge. So could this be the reason for their jealousy? Or perhaps they saw a chance to gain favor with the king by informing on those who had disobeyed him. It is notable the text uses the word Jews here. This is the only time in Daniel that this word is used, possibly hinting at the astrologers' anti-Semitism. Using this word would also be a rousing call to the Hebrews of the Second Temple period, when the term Jews first arose. This kind of story would remind them of their unique identity as God's people who refused to bow to idols, whether Babylonian, Greek, or Roman. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were called before the king and given an exceedingly clear choice: bow or die. It almost seems out of character for Nebuchadnezzar to give them one more chance. But even if he respected them as leaders, his insecurity would not allow further insubordination. Note the king's dismissive attitude in verse 15 toward the God he had declared was the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings, when Daniel had interpreted his dream. So back in chapter 2, right? Oh, your God is the God. Your God is the Lord of gods, back in chapter 2. And being a heathen, being a king, his arrogancy, he's like he forgot it already. It seems Nebuchadnezzar accepted God's ability to communicate through dreams, but rejected God's authority over his life and his kingdom. Even today, God's people are sometimes singled out for our commitment to him. This seems to be especially true when we reject the world's definitions of what is good and what is evil. Knowing we would face these dilemmas, Paul encouraged Christians to stand firm in the faith, be courageous, 1 Corinthians 16, and Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power, so that you will be able to stand firm against all the strategies of the devil. Ephesians 6:10. Now, verses 16 through 18. For Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the moment of decision had come. Would they bow to the king's pressure, or would they refuse to bend the knee to anything or anyone but the one true God? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego exemplified the confidence Jesus called for in Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. Jesus said, "Don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They cannot touch your soul. Fear only God, who can destroy both soul and body in hell." Their response to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 3:16 seems directed toward both his ultimatum to bow or die and his question, what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Speaking directly, the men revealed two supreme beliefs. God alone is worthy of worship, and he could spare them from the fire. However, they recognized that just because God could save them did not guarantee that he would. Regardless of the outcome, they would remain faithful to God, trusting his plan for their lives. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, unshakable faith is humbling and encouraging. We cannot predict how God will answer our prayers, and we cannot coerce him into falling into line with our plans. But we can trust his power to intervene and his love for us. When life doesn't follow the script we think it should, that does not mean God is less present, strong, or loving than we had believed him to be. It's so hard for us to grasp that, especially in our hour of need. We're really desperate. Lord, where are you? Verses 19 through 23. The story soon reached its climax when Nebuchadnezzar, in a fit of rage, followed through on his threat. Up to this point in the book of Daniel, the faith of the Jewish captives had not led to persecution. But here in chapter 3, the potential danger of serving God in a hostile culture became a reality. Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage at the defiance of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Having the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual is probably a figure of speech that simply means get it as hot as you can get it. Then the king commanded his strongest men to tie them up and throw them into the fire. With a superheated furnace and the super strong soldiers, Nebuchadnezzar was not taking any chances that his captives might escape punishment. Nebuchadnezzar apparently did not intend this to be a sacrifice where the victims die with bravery and dignity. Instead, he created a chaotic, violent scene of retribution. There would be no due process, no decorum. In fact, the king was in such a hurry that the men were thrown in the furnace fully clothed. We are not sure what the words for their clothing exactly represent, but including this detail to the story helps to set up the miracle to follow. The author also includes an illustration of just how hot the inferno was. The flames killed the soldiers, as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. Oh, Lord, Father, let us be as faithful. Let us be as faithful in our times of trial and temptation, in our times of trial, Lord. Let us be faithful to you. Verses 24 and 27. As we are about to see, God did not deliver them from the fire. He delivered them through the fire. Some commentators think the furnace was built into the side of a hill, while others envision it as metal and beehive shaped. In either case, it seems to have had an opening on top where the men were thrown, and a door or window on the side where the spectators could see what was happening on the inside. Looking through the opening, Nebuchadnezzar was shocked by what he saw. Instead of 3 figures in the fire, the king saw 4, and the 4th person looked like a god. This portion of Daniel was originally written in Aramaic rather than Hebrew. And the text of verse 25 literally reads, a son of the gods. So Nebuchadnezzar would have been saying, the 4th one looks like a son of the gods. Although the King James Version renders this phrase as the Son of God, and the story may indeed point to Christ, Nebuchadnezzar obviously did not have the second person of the Trinity in mind. Nebuchadnezzar had no idea who Jesus Christ was, the Son of God. So the first thing would have been more sensible. Looks like a son of the gods. In fact, in verse 28, he calls the figure an angel, a term which could signify the appearance of a deity in his culture. Jewish tradition holds that the 4th figure in the furnace was the angel of the Lord, a title often associated with theophanies or encounters with God. While the author of Daniel does not specify the nature of this 4th figure, he does indicate the being as is divine. Regardless of the mystery surrounding the 4th figure in the fire, what is clear is that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were miraculously saved. This was a public miracle, since it appears the intended execution was witnessed by the crowd of officials that had already been gathered. After walking around in the fire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the furnace when Nebuchadnezzar called them. There was no evidence that they had even been near a fire, no burns, no singed hair, no scorched robes, no smell of smoke. The Septuagint includes later Jewish writings called the Prayer of Azariah, which would have been Abednego, and the Song of the 3 Jews. Although these writings do not carry the weight of the Holy Scripture, they add several interesting details to the story. They claim that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked around in the midst of the fire, singing hymns to God and blessing the Lord. And the angel of the Lord made the inside of the furnace as though a moist wind were whistling through it. The writings then include a prayer and a long hymn of praise that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego supposedly sung in the flames. While we cannot know for certain what happened inside the furnace, we do know that God miraculously intervened so that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked out of the furnace unharmed. Verses 28 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar praised God and acknowledged his strength to save. But readers are meant to take the king's conversion with a grain of salt. Throughout the first 3 chapters of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has shown a tendency to bounce back and forth between extreme violence and extreme religious devotion. In contrast, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego show firm and steadfast faith. Yeah, because, Nebuchadnezzar he's in the position of, again, serving and worshiping all gods. And so this is just another one to add to the list. And I talk with people and my wife, and I'm talking with like, here you see this, and then you have Paul when he's talking to that group of people. Was it maybe Colossians? Anyway, Paul is talking to a group of people, and he said, hey, he says, I've been walking around here, and you have a statue to this God, and a statue to that God, and a statue to this God, and a statue to this God, a statue to this God. He says, I noticed that you have a statue over here that says, to the unknown God. Because again, these people, they worshipped pretty much anything and anybody in order to be on the good side of God. They were going to cover all their bases, right? You have a unknown God. And Paul said, well, let me tell you about this unknown God, because I know who he is. And he's had a discourse with them, a teaching, a conversation with them, discussions, because that's what they would do. They would sit around in a big group and talk and ask questions and stuff. Dissertation, discourse. Let me tell you who this unknown God is. The ending of Daniel chapter 3 is similar to the ending of chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar declared God to be the greatest of gods, the Lord over kings. Of course, as we just read, he followed up this declaration by forcing his empire to worship a statue and trying to murder the Jews who remained loyal to God. Now, after witnessing another miracle, he blessed the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and threatened that anyone who spoke against this God would get ripped into shreds. We cannot speak to the true nature of the king's heart, but it seems that he was trying to appease God so he would not be punished, rather than acting from genuine humility and reverence. Again, oh, this God is powerful. I'm sorry that I did this to your boys. I'm sorry that I did this to your boys. I'm going to prove it to you. So, hey, I'm just going to make this declaration. Daniel 3:30 marks Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego exit from the book after having been promoted by the king. Over these 3 chapters, they have proven to be gifted, committed, and faithful. Still today, people may oppose our beliefs, but they cannot deny our devotion to God when we serve him joyfully and faithfully through hard times. Just like Jesus, the Jewish captives, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, chose to obey God even to the face of death. We must be just as committed, just as surrendered to his will. God is able to rescue us from danger, but even when we go through the fire, we will never be alone. Lord, help us always remember the outcome, to the goal that we are looking forward to. Heaven. Oh, Lord, help us. Lord, help us. All right. So that wraps up this week's lesson, folks. I'm going to try and get this uploaded and be out there for you real quick. Hopefully it uploads quick. Okay. Next week, May 10th. Is that Mother's Day next week? Next week is Danger of Pride. And we're going to jump up to Daniel chapter 5 and 1 Peter chapter 5. The danger of pride. Daniel 5 and 1 Peter chapter 5. All right. Thanks again for being with me today. Like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications. Make some comments down there for me and give me some thumbs up, all that kind of stuff. I appreciate it. whenever you do. And again, I'm giving a shout out to Hope Church of Big Rapids, Pastor Dwayne Felpage. You can find us on Facebook at 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. And then he does have a Wednesday night Bible class also. So come check us out if you are in the local area. Come and see us 10 a.m. on Sunday mornings. So I'd like to finish up with, again, shed sin for salvation, shed sickness for healing, and shed slavery for deliverance. Our salvation, when we submit to Christ, when we ask for forgiveness, the blood that Christ shed on Calvary covers your sin, your healing, and deliverance. It covers all of that. Take advantage of that. All right? Shed. All right. Thanks again. God bless, and we'll see you here next week. Bye.